Welcome back to For the Road, and welcome back to the new workshop. Today I'm going to have a look at the 1964 Sprint GT, my old daily driver. It's been mothballed for a few months off the road due to a few little mechanical issues, but I'd like to start driving again as it is my favorite car. Let's have a look at the few little mechanical problems that are keeping this car off the road. Under the hood, there are a fair amount of mechanical things that have gone wrong. The two main things that are keeping it off the road right now are the carburetors and the starter motor. The starter motor is intermittent. Sometimes it locks up, sometimes it cranks the motor, but it's pretty unreliable. The carburetors are flooding and it doesn't want a hot start. When you combine that with the starter motor issue, you really don't want to drive this anyway. You never know if you'll be able to get it going again. Those are the two things we're going to have a look at today. And from there, we'll address the rest of the mechanical issues. I still have an engine rebuild plan for this in a few months, so I'm not going to get too carried away. The first thing I'm going to have to do is remove the top of the airbox, get the carburetors off, and then you get pretty easy access to the starter motor, which is down quite deep in the engine bay. Getting the carbs off this car is not that easy. Any 105 Alfa Romeo knows how difficult it is to get the carburetors off, so I'll start with that. These are the GT's 40mm Weber DCOE 4s. I'm not sure why they're flooding, but I'll have another look later. They seem to be... They're a bit filthy, but they seem to be in pretty good order. I'm not really sure why it doesn't want to start on these, but we'll open them up and have a look. Maybe it just needs to be cleaned. Maybe there's just a bit of dirt on a needle and seat or something like that. With the carburetors out, you can have a better look at the starter motor, which is mounted just beneath them. And you can see it's pretty close to the throttle linkage and, just under the oil pressure sender unit. You can see all the wires going to it, for the wire coming straight from the battery and going to the fuse box and the switch on the dashboard. So whenever you're working in the engine bay, especially around the carburetors and under here, you should definitely disconnect the battery because there's so many things you can short out on using a spanner in here. The bolts for the starter motor are actually really difficult to get to. They're behind the pipe for the crankcase breather. I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge to get the starter motor out without lifting the car up and getting it to it from the underside, but I'll start by just taking stuff like the throttle linkage and that. Can pull that off to make things a little bit easier. It's just a very, very tight fit for that starter down there. Right, it was pretty tricky getting the starter motor out. It did not want to free up in the engine bay. I had to take the crankcase breather pipe off to get to the bolts, and even then it was hooking on all the wires and the plumbing, and so that's not an easy bit to get out. I hope it's not going to be that difficult putting it back. Yeah, in here there's just so much for that starter to hook on. You can see how greasy and dirty it is down there. One of the mechanical issues with this car is that it has quite high crankcase pressure because I think it's got a broken piston ring. So it pushes a lot of oil out if you thrash the car and it all sort of lands down where the starter would be. Yes, that's out. And now we can have a look at why it's not turning properly. It doesn't seem to be in that bad condition if you look at it. And it wasn't that long ago that I had it built. Yeah, the gear doesn't look too bad. We'll open it up and see what's going on. Usually if something like this is starting to malfunction, it probably just needs a clean and a service, and it should be a lot better. Overall, the starter seemed to be in pretty okay condition, considering it was only rebuilt a few years ago. But it's just really dirty. It's just full of a lot of dust and grime, and the kind of stuff that would usually kill a starter. So we'll clean it up, put some fresh grease and stuff in it, and it should be good to go. Right, I've got the starter motor back in and bolted in and all the wires done up. I also cleaned up the main battery negative point to the body, the main grounding point, because I think that was maybe part of the problem, was that the grounds for everything was pretty bad. Anyway, let's crank it and see how it goes. Okay, cool. It cranks. I don't want to crank it too much because it's going to start pumping fuel out of the hoses. Now I'm just going to clean up those carbs and slap those back on. Now that I've got the tops off the carbs, I've found out why it's flooding slightly. One of the floats has started leaking and it's got some fuel in it, so if you slosh it about, you can hear the fuel around, so that's dragging it down. Luckily I do have the spare, so I'll install that, and hopefully this won't happen again. This has happened to me twice now on this car, so I'm a bit worried about why it's so frequent. I think maybe the solid carburetor mounts are doing that, but for now this will get it to run. Right, I've got the carburetors back on and everything hooked up, including the ignition coil, which I put back in the same place. I think it should fire up. I hope it's going to fire up now. The float bowls are empty, so this might take a bit of cranking to get it to work. I'm not sure how the battery is either. Well, I think it would probably help if you connect the ignition coil to the fuse box again. That might... There we go. Hey, at least it fires. Yesterday afternoon I took this car for a short drive just to put some petrol in it, and it ran pretty well. It started easily, it idled well, it didn't flood, so I'm pretty happy that this is going to be reliable. So I'm going to start driving this as my daily driver again. I've changed the front wheels over to the TZ1 wheels again because those Momos are quite badly out of balance and it shook the car up quite badly as I was driving. Obviously this has a lot of mechanical issues that are still need to be fixed, and when this car gets rebuilt pretty soon in the next few months, that will happen, or that will be addressed. But for now I'm just happy to be daily driving this again because this car is my favorite car and nothing feels quite as good to me as this. The reason I'm not driving the Giulia right now is because the door is broken and it only goes up about 125 centimeters, so the Giulia will not fit under it. The GT only just makes it under. And it's also the reason the GTV is sitting here and not at the panel beaters, because I've got to get this door fixed before anything can leave this workshop. So thanks for watching this episode of For the Road. There should be episodes up every week, but for now I'm going to take this car on a drive, because what's the point of having these cars if you don't drive them? They are, after all, built for the road.